The first time I heard his laugh, I hated him. Too confident, too sharp, like a man who had never known what it felt like to be crushed under the weight of other people's judgments. The second time, I wanted more than anything to hear it again. That's the way it is with Jonathan Hale, New York's golden lawyer, a man who could slice a courtroom in half with a single smirk, yet still find time to pour himself a bourbon at midnight as if the world belonged to him. And me? I was the intern who accidentally found his secret. I never thought love could come wrapped in shadows, buried beneath locked drawers and whispered names. But that was before I walked into his office one night, when the city outside screamed with sirens, and saw something I was never supposed to see. Jonathan Hale wasn't just my boss. He was the kind of man people wrote headlines about. The youngest partner at one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms, draped in Armani, carved from marble, untouchable. The kind of man I told myself I would never fall for. Yet here I am, sitting across from him, watching the way his jaw tightens as he reviews a case file, the way his hand grips the pen like it might break. I should be focusing on my notes. I should be invisible like every intern before me. But I can't stop noticing him. And maybe, just maybe, he notices me too. It started with small things. A glance that lasted too long. The way his voice dropped softer when he said my name. The brush of his shoulder against mine when he leaned over to correct my draft. Nothing that could be proven, nothing that could be confessed. But I felt it. God, I felt it. Until the night I opened the wrong file. The law firm was asleep, desks empty. Lights dimmed except for the glow of the city outside. I was finishing a memo when I realized I'd left my notes in Jonathan's office. His door was unlocked, unusual for him. He was meticulous, always precise. And then I saw it. A photograph tucked inside a folder, half hidden under legal briefs. Jonathan smiling, younger, holding another man's hand in a way no professional photo ever captured. The look in his eyes wasn't the cold, calculated gaze of New York star attorney. It was raw, intimate, vulnerable. Before I could process it, his voice came from the doorway. "You shouldn't be in here." I froze, guilt burning through me, the photo still in my hand. He walked in slowly, his presence swallowing the room. His tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his eyes shadowed by something I couldn't name. For the first time, Jonathan Hale looked less like a god and more like a man caught bleeding. "What do you think you saw?" His voice was low, dangerous, but trembling at the edges. I wanted to lie. I wanted to pretend. But instead, I whispered, "I think I saw the truth." What followed wasn't shouting. It wasn't anger. It was silence, the kind that presses down on you until you can't breathe. Jonathan took the photo from my hand, set it gently on the desk, and looked at me like I was something he couldn't afford to want but couldn't let go of either. "You don't understand," he said finally. "Then explain it to me." For a long time he said nothing. His hand hovered near mine, close enough to feel the heat, far enough to deny the intent. When he finally leaned in, his lips brushed my ear, his breath hot and trembling. "If you knew everything, you'd run." And then he walked away, leaving me with the echo of his words and the kind of ache that doesn't fade. The days after that were unbearable. He acted normal, colder, even as if nothing had happened. He buried himself in work, slammed doors, barked orders. And yet, I could feel it, thrumming under the surface. The secret, the pull, the thing we weren't allowed to name. But the more I tried to stay away, the more I caught myself watching him. The late nights, the way he rubbed his temples when he thought no one saw, the haunted look in his eyes when he thought the world had turned its back. And I knew then, this wasn't just about attraction. This was about survival. Jonathan Hale was hiding something that could destroy him. And somehow I had become part of it. That night, when he finally let his guard down, it wasn't in words. It was in the way his hand trembled when it touched mine. It was in the way his voice cracked when he whispered, "I don't want to hurt you." And it was in the way I leaned in anyway, because sometimes love doesn't wait for permission. It should have ended there. I should have walked away, filed my resignation, buried whatever I thought I felt under the cold steel of ambition. Men like Jonathan didn't fall in love with interns. Men like Jonathan didn't risk their careers, their reputations, their very lives, for something as fragile as intimacy. And yet, I didn't quit. I stayed. Every day afterward was a battlefield, though no one around us seemed to know it. To the partners, I was just another nameless assistant, fetching coffee and sorting case files. To Jonathan, I was something else, an Tyrellian intruder, a liability, a danger to the world he had built so carefully. But there was something in his silence. Something in the way he avoided my gaze, in the way his hand lingered too long on the files I passed him, in the way his voice caught when he called me into his office at midnight. He wanted me, and he hated himself for it. 2 weeks after the night of the photograph, he finally snapped. "Close the door," he said, his voice sharper than usual. I obeyed, the heavy thud of the door sealing us in. His office smelled of leather and bourbon, the blinds drawn tight, the city outside nothing more than a faint hum. Jonathan stood with his back to me, staring at a case file like it held the answers to questions neither of us dared ask. "Why are you still here?" His voice was low, frayed, exhausted. I swallowed hard. "Because I want to be." He turned then, eyes dark and glassy. "Don't you understand what this is? What it could cost me? What it could cost you?" "I'm not afraid of that," I said. And it was true. I wasn't. Not of him, not of us. The only thing that scared me was walking away without knowing what it felt like to be his. Jonathan's laugh was bitter. "You should be. You should run from me as fast as you can." And yet, he didn't tell me to leave. Instead, he crossed the room in 2 long strides and stopped inches from me. His breath hitched, his jaw clenched. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the raw tension thrumming in the space between us. "If I touch you," he whispered, "I won't stop." "Then don't stop," I whispered back. The kiss wasn't gentle. It wasn't sweet. It was desperate, angry, a collision of years of repression and fear. His hand tangled in my hair, pulling me closer, while mine gripped the front of his shirt like I was drowning and he was the only thing keeping me afloat. For a moment, the world disappeared. No courtroom, no clients, no headlines. Just us 2 men breaking every rule, clinging to each other like salvation. When he finally pulled away, his forehead pressed against mine, his voice cracked. "This is madness." "Maybe," I said, breathless, "but it's ours." The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances and whispered meetings, of late-night phone calls and excuses to linger in his office long after everyone else had gone home. We built a world in shadows, fragile and secret, but alive. And for the first time, Jonathan looked human. He laughed, really laughed, the sound softer, warmer than I'd ever imagined. He let me see the man behind the legend, the one who cooked pasta at 2 a.m. because he couldn't sleep, the one who played piano in the dark when he thought no one was listening, the one who carried grief like a scar across his heart. I fell in love with all of it. But secrets don't stay buried forever. One evening, as autumn wind howled against the windows, Jonathan showed up at my apartment. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie missing, his eyes burning with something close to panic. "They know," he said before I could even speak. "Who?" "The partners. Or at least they suspect." He paced the length of my living room, hands in his hair, muttering like a man unraveling. "If they find out, it's over. Everything I've built gone. And you." He stopped, looking at me with fear sharper than any blade. "They'll destroy you too." I stood frozen, the weight of his words pressing down on me. This was bigger than us. Bigger than stolen kisses and late-night whispers. This was the kind of truth that could ruin lives. "Then what do we do?" I asked. His answer was immediate, ruthless. "We end it." The words gutted me. "No," I whispered. "Yes," he snapped, though his voice shook. "We don't have a choice." I stepped closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Jonathan, listen to me. You've spent your whole life hiding, pretending, locking yourself behind walls. And maybe that worked before. But not now. Not with me. You don't have to do this alone anymore." His face broke then, just a crack, enough for me to see the boy he used to beta one who once held another man's hand in a photograph, before the world taught him to be ashamed. "I'm so tired," he said, and the confession was softer than a sigh. "Then let me carry some of it." And for the first time, he let me. But love doesn't protect you from the world. The next morning, a rumor spread through the office like wildfire. Someone had seen us leaving together. Someone had questions. Jonathan's name began to circulate in hushed voices. His perfect reputation suddenly frayed at the edges. By noon, his office door slammed shut. By evening, he was gone, vanished into the night, leaving me with nothing but silence. And that's when I realized the secret wasn't just about us. Jonathan Hale was hiding something darker, something that could shatter us both. The silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Jonathan's office was dark, his desk stripped bare, his coat missing from the rack. He was gone, and he hadn't left a note. It should have been simple, except that he'd chosen survival over love, that he'd buried himself back behind the fortress of his career. But I couldn't, because every piece of me screamed that something else was at play, that his disappearance wasn't just about shame or reputation. The photograph I'd seen weeks ago, him, younger, holding another man's hand, flashed in my mind. Who was he? Why did Jonathan keep it hidden, guarded like it was the most dangerous thing in the world? I knew one thing. The secret I'd stumbled onto was bigger than I had imagined. And if I wanted Jonathan back, I'd have to face it head-on. I tried calling. No answer. Texts went unread. The law firm closed ranks, partners giving me cold stares, associates whispering as I walked by. I was poisoned now, tainted by proximity to the great Jonathan Hale. 2 nights later, I found him. Not in his office, not at his apartment, but in a dive bar downtown, the kind of place where no one asked names and the air stank of regret. He was at the far end of the counter, tie gone, shirt open at the throat, staring into a glass like it might hold redemption. I slid onto the stool beside him. "You really thought you could disappear without me noticing?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't look at me. "Go home." "No, you don't understand what you're doing." "Then explain it," I shot back. "Because right now, all I see is a man too afraid to let himself be loved." That got him. He turned, his eyes wild, broken. A storm I couldn't look away from. "This isn't about love," he hissed. "This is about survival." "Then let me survive with you." For a long moment, he just stared at me, like he couldn't decide whether to kiss me or push me away forever. Finally, he drained his glass and muttered, "Come on." He took me to his apartment, but not the polished one uptown that everyone knew about. This was a second place, smaller, messier, the kind of place that looked lived in, not staged. Papers were scattered on the table, photos taped to the fridge, a guitar leaning against the wall. Felt real. He dropped into a chair, rubbing his temples. "You want to know the truth? Fine. But once I tell you, you don't get to unknow it. Tell me." His hands trembled as he reached for a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were documents, photographs, letters. He spread them across the table, and my chest tightened as I pieced them together. It wasn't just about him being gay. It was about who he had loved. The man in the photograph, the one he'd held so tenderly, wasn't just a fling. He was a whistleblower, someone who had uncovered corruption inside the very law firm Jonathan now worked for. A man who had threatened to expose the partners, to drag their darkest dealings into the light. And then he had vanished. "They made it look like he ran," Jonathan said, voice hoarse. "Like he got scared and disappeared. But I know better. He was silenced. And if they knew I was with him, if they knew I cared," his voice cracked, "I'd be next." The weight of it hit me like a fist. This wasn't just forbidden love. This was life and death. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "Because you deserve a life, not a grave." I should have walked away then. I should have been smart, cut my losses, let Jonathan bear his burden alone. But love doesn't bend to logic. Love doesn't care about survival. "We'll find the truth," I said, my hand covering his. "Together." He stared at me like I was insane. Then, slowly, his fingers curled around mine. "You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe. But at least I'll go down fighting for something real. For the first time, he didn't argue. The weeks that followed blurred into a dangerous rhythm. We became conspirators as much as lovers, sneaking through old files, tracing whispers of evidence, piecing together the puzzle his lover had left behind. Jonathan was different now, softer in some ways, harder in others. He held me at night like he was afraid I'd vanish, kissed me like it was both a prayer and an apology. But during the day, he was sharp, relentless, fueled by the need to finish what his lover had started. And I saw the man behind the mask, the man no one else was allowed to know. Not the star lawyer, not the untouchable figure in Armani, but Jonathan Hale, broken and brave, terrified and stubborn, carrying a secret that could burn the world down. I loved him more than ever, and that terrified me. One night, after hours of sifting through files, I collapsed on his couch, exhaustion pulling at my bones. He sat beside me, a rare stillness in his eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, brushing hair from my forehead. "I want to be here." He leaned down, his lips grazing mine, his voice trembling. "If they find out about us, they'll use you to get to me. Then let them try." He kissed me then, slow and desperate, the kind of kiss that tasted like goodbye even though neither of us said the word. Because deep down, we both knew this couldn't last. Secrets demand sacrifice, and ours was coming due. The first threat arrived 2 days later. A note slipped under Jonathan's office door. No signature. Just 4 words scrawled in black ink. "We know about him." He showed it to me with shaking hands, his face pale. "They'll destroy me," he whispered. I took the note, ripped it in half, and met his gaze. "No, they'll try. But this time they won't win." His eyes burned into mine, searching, desperate. And for once, he didn't look like the man with all the answers. He looked like someone praying I could be strong enough for the both of us. And I vowed I would be. The note had been a warning, but what followed was a war. Within days, Jonathan's world cracked wide open. Anonymous emails circulated among the partners, files went missing, and whispers turned into accusations. The firm that had crowned him its golden boy now looked at him with suspicion, hungry for blood. And in the middle of it all, I stood by his side. We worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragments left by the man Jonathan once loved, building a case against the corruption festering at the core of the firm. But with every step forward, the threats grew sharper, notes slipped under doors, late-night calls that ended in silence, shadows lingering outside Jonathan's apartment. One night, I woke to find him standing at the window, staring down at the city like it was a battlefield. "They won't stop until I'm ruined," he whispered. I came up behind him, wrapping my arms around his waist, pressing my face against the tense line of his back. "Then let them come. We'll ruin them first." For the first time in weeks, he laughed, a broken, weary sound, but real. And he turned, kissed me with something fierce and unyielding. "God help me. I think I believe you." The confrontation came in the form of a trial. Jonathan made the impossible choice. To go public, to expose the corruption in the firm he had bled for, to risk everything including us. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. About finishing what the man in the photograph had started. The courtroom was packed, cameras flashing, the air thick with anticipation. I sat behind him, close enough that he could feel my presence, close enough that, if he faltered, I'd be there to hold him up. And when he spoke, his voice didn't tremble. "This firm," he said, eyes burning into the faces of his former partners, "was built on lies, on silencing those who dared to tell the truth. Years ago, a man I loved tried to expose it, and they erased him. I stayed silent then, out of fear, but I won't stay silent now." Gasps rippled through the room, reporters scribbling furiously, flashes igniting. His hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, but his voice was steady. "I am a lawyer. My duty is to the truth. And the truth is this: corruption doesn't just rot systems. It rots souls. I won't let it rot mine anymore." He turned then, just for a heartbeat, his eyes finding mine. And in that look, I saw it all: fear, love, defiance, hope. The trial was brutal. The partners fought with every weapon they had, dragging Jonathan's name through the mud, whispering about his past, about me. They painted our love as weakness, as scandal, as proof he couldn't be trusted. But Jonathan never broke, and neither did I. When they sneered about us, I lifted my chin higher. When they tried to humiliate him, I held his gaze, reminding him silently, "You're not alone anymore." Day after day, the battle raged, and slowly, piece by piece, the truth cut through the lies. Documents leaked. Witnesses came forward. The story the firm had buried for years clawed its way into the light. And finally, the gavel struck. Guilty. The partners were finished. Their empire crumbled, their power stripped away. The man in the photograph, Jonathan's lost lover, was no longer erased. His truth had survived. And so had we. After the verdict, the city outside the courthouse roared with noise reporters shouting, cameras flashing, strangers reaching for Jonathan's hand. But in the chaos, he turned to me, his face raw, his voice breaking. "They'll never stop talking," he said. "They'll never let us just be." I smiled through the tears I didn't realize I was shedding. "Then let them talk. Let the world see what it means to love without fear." He kissed me there on the courthouse steps with the whole city watching. And for once, neither of us cared who saw. Months later, life was quieter. Not easy, not simple, but ours. Jonathan left the firm, started his own practice dedicated to cases that mattered, to voices that needed defending. His name was no longer chained to corruption, but to courage. And us? We built something in the open this time. No shadows, no secrets. We cooked late-night pasta without guilt. He played piano with the windows open. I wrote while he read, our silence filled with comfort instead of fear. One evening, as autumn lights spilled gold through our apartment, he came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders, his lips brushing my ear. "You saved me," he whispered. I turned, resting my forehead against his. "No, we saved each other." He smiled then, a rare, unguarded smile, and kissed me like it was the first time all over again. And in that moment, I knew the world could never take this from us. Not anymore, because love the kind worth fighting for is the one secret you never bury. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.